Greetings and welcome to the International Pediatric Simulation Society podcast. This show is for people passionate about pediatric simulation-based education, training, and research. Podcast hosts are members of IPSS, a global community of multidisciplinary healthcare professionals from over 30 countries, all dedicated to improving the care of infants and children worldwide. Each week, one of our sub-hosts, Christine Bailey, Elaine Ng, Aaron Karn-Bennett, and myself, Samreen Vora, will introduce you to a new guest and bring you into a conversation with simulationists and healthcare professionals from across the world. Come along.
Welcome, simulation enthusiasts, to another episode of IPSS, the podcast. I am your host today, Christine Bailey, with my colleague, Ingrid Anderson.
It's Ingrid Anderson. Very pleased to be here with you today.
We are the Education Committee co-chairs for IPSS, and we are so thrilled. We have some special guests with us today who we recruited from their presentation at IPSSW in Munich. And the presentation was called Usability Testing for an Extended Reality Education Platform for Parents of Technology-Dependent Children. And I'm going to have Keith Widmeier and Amanda Manzi introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm Keith Widmeier. I am the Simulation Immersive Technology Educator at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Manzi. I'm a clinical nurse specialist in the PICU at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and also on the PICU simulation operations team.
Fantastic. We are so excited to have you guys here. We would like to hear more, like, how did this begin? Tell us a little bit about what sparked your idea to use XR for teaching parents and technology-dependent children.
Sure. So many years ago, this project I was actually just reviewing started in 2019, which sounds like it was so long ago and feels like it was so short ago. But we were having issues with our caregivers retaining knowledge for specifically technical skills regarding caring for their technology-dependent children at home. So we would hear often in pulmonology outpatient visits that families were concerned they would not be able to provide emergency care. And unfortunately, in 2019, we also had a couple patients pass away that our team believed could have been preventable deaths that were directly related to the parents not being able to provide emergency care in the home. Now, when we think about the fact that these kids are tracheostomy dependent and ventilator dependent, we're really asking a lot of the lay caregiver, of the parent. And so we as simulationists and as critical care healthcare providers really wanted to give a solution of skills refreshers to patients and their families. We initially pursued an in-person high-fidelity simulation as the option. However, due to a number of challenges that many are likely familiar with, such as space and personnel and time and buy-in and all of the things that make it hard to do a really great simulation, we also were partnering with the fact that families needed to make the time during their outpatient visit, and we needed to share the resources of the inpatient world. So that brought me to putting my head together with who at that point suggested some virtual reality and augmented reality solutions. And I'll let him take it from there with how we started out.
Yeah, thank you. We did have a very well-established simulation program prior to discharge. And I think that's important to call out because we do a really good job of preparing patients and patient families before they leave. So we have the support. Parents have the dedicated time before discharge, but that really was one of the complicating factors post-discharge is the protected time for the families, as well as meeting them in a space that is reasonable for them. When we were originally looking at this, we were looking at a few different platforms, and the struggles were, do we find a platform that is commercially available and work with a vendor to build a case for us? Do we try and build something ourselves? Do we try to build something ourselves, recruiting programmers or having it developed independently? That is obviously a very costly thing initially, as well as the maintenance really became burdensome. And then we ultimately had to figure out what is it that we wanted as far as accessibility. Because When we were going through and initially envisioning this, virtual reality seemed to be the way where people would be able to get the most engagement, but the accessibility at home is challenging. So having the function of multi-platforms where we could offer the virtual reality components, but also have it available on patient families' phones or tablets seemed to be an ideal solution. And that's how we ended up where we're at currently with our current module.
What a challenge that you have to make this available on different platforms, so make it accessible on phones and different computer systems. How does the platform work with all of that competing technology?
Great question. If we were to do this in a traditional route, we would actually have to have a build for virtual reality, a build for iPhones or smartphones in general. So one for iPhones, one for Androids, and then for tablets and etc. The platform that we currently utilize allows us to build in a game engine that is very popular amongst the program community. It's Unity. If you look at gaming development, there's really two major game engines. There's Unity and there's Unreal Engine. So the people that make games for smartphones, or if they make games for PlayStation or Xbox or anything, they usually build it in one of these two platforms. So we're able to build it in Unity, which is helpful because it allows transferability if we decide to grow, and it gives us more options. But the platform that we utilize, Education XR, has a checkbox where we can just click which platforms we want to publish to. That allows us to build one module and then publish it to different platforms. One of the challenges with that is thinking about how it gets used. So when we talk about smartphones, we were looking at two different ways of using it. One is screen-based, where you can just kind of click through to the next screen, next step for each section. And then the other one was with augmented reality. And I always think of Pokemon Go when I'm thinking of augmented reality, where you have your phone and there's nothing in the physical space, but if you're pointing it around, you see a little Pokemon digitally on your screen. We had to think about how it would be used for both of those, as well as in virtual reality. Grab one step in the module that we built for trachs was picking up the patient and moving them to the ground. Well, you can do that with two hands and pick them up and move them to the ground in virtual reality. But we had to think of how that would be done in virtual reality or augmented reality. So we had to make it pretty much a click on the patient, then have an animation move it down. So we just had to think through how it would be used on the different platforms.
So cool. I could see the benefit of that. That does seem very high tech to me. What other kinds of scenarios do you have parents interact with?
So for the moment, this is actually our first pilot scenario. As Keith mentioned, we do have a very well-established high-fidelity simulation program for the patient's inpatient that needs to be complete before discharge. Our goal will be to eventually replicate all of those scenarios so that we have really reinforcement teaching for each of the skills. So that would be water down the trach, false tract, unable to place the trach, unexplained desaturation, and loss of power. We started with the plugged trach scenario first because it actually felt like one of the more complex scenarios, and with moving the patient, getting them on the ground, do they need a blanket roll, and all of the haptic feedback. Once we figured out how to do that, we thought it would be much easier to translate into other scenarios. So we do have plans to build further, but that's why we chose to start where we did.
The reason we chose this is it is encompassing of a few different things. We do have the ability to take some of the components that we've already built. For example, the suctioning. We can take that component and we can put that into another module. But maybe that's the endpoint is they go through, they recognize distress, they suction, and then the situation resolves. Or maybe in the case that we have, they have to go through, they suction, it's unsuccessful, then they have to go through and do a trach change. So we are able to take the stuff that we already have built and we can use it in those other modules. One of the really cool things about this, I can't say enough wonderful things about the job that our PCU does preparing these patients to go home. But one of the things that they just can't do, given the limitations of space, is they can't really make it a scenario that looks like anything other than a hospital room, we're limited by the space that we have. In VR, the case that we have, they're on a playground. So there's kids in the background playing. The fidelity, it helps with the engagement, makes it more real. Also, with our patient, we actually have it where the first screen that pops up, they have a couple of options. So they can pick a skin tone. Our goal is to have cuffed and uncuffed, so they can pick the one that's appropriate. And eventually, we'd like to have an option where they can pick a patient size. Infant, toddler, school age, teenager. So that's some of the plans for growth, but we're limited by the equipment and the space that we have with physical simulation.
When you're talking about the development of the scenario, could you tell us a little bit more about what your usability testing looked like? Who participated? How did you decide if it was successful or not?
We're finished our first phase and we're getting ready to go into our next phase of usability testing. Our first phase was really clinical team members, all except for one. We did have one patient family member who was able to participate and provided such valuable feedback. Most of the participants were clinical team members, nurses, physicians, CNS, respiratory. And I think something else to point out, just for transparency, some of those team members did participate as users going through and helped provide very valuable feedback as well. Just, I feel like it's important to point that out because, they were part of the development, so could definitely understand potential bias there, but I think honestly, they were very critical because they wanted to make sure it is good and it's helpful to the patients they serve.
And that interprofessional representation, they all bring different perspectives into managing care of these children too. So I think having their perspectives on care priorities, treatment intervention priorities, skills that they would be performing for parents, I have a good lens for that.
Absolutely. And I guess back to Ingrid's, initial question. So how did we go through that? So that was the selection criteria, and it really was a convenience sample for that first phase. And the way we ran it was we had participants come in, we did an orientation to the screen-based setup. Then we had them go through the screen-based module on a phone. They completed it. They completed a red cap. Then they went through and did the augmented reality on the same phone, completed the module, completed a red cap, and then they went through in virtual reality, and then they completed another red cap. And then we did an interview afterwards over all three. And the red cap itself included the system usability scale. So we went through 10 questions in, and then depending on what platform they just completed for the red cap, we had some targeted questions. So for the phone based, we had questions, did it lock up? Did it freeze? Anything like that. For virtual reality, we had questions where, did you get nauseous? Did you feel dizzy or lightheaded? Asking questions that were more specific to head-mounted displays.
When you had the initial team, or then when the parents started testing this out, did you have any unexpected challenges or insights from that interaction with them and the technology?
So many.
There are always so many challenges with technology.
One of the things that we encountered in our very first session was that we learned the build that we had, it was too rich. In technical terms, there were too many polygons and too much content to process on older phones. So we actually had to, at the end of everything, we went back and refined the build entirely to make it function cleaner on multiple phones. Obviously, we're going to have to say it has to be at a certain level of phone before to move forward, but we were able to make it function on older phones afterwards. But for the testing purposes, because we encountered that, we ended up using one specific phone and we used it for everybody as opposed to people using their own phone. So that was one technical barrier. Beyond barriers, we had some amazing insights, especially, like I said, we had one patient family member, a caregiver who was able to participate, who had been through the training before, and they provided some incredibly valuable insights, such as where they would place the suction machine, the portable suction, and whether or not they would remove the HME. Because we were thinking with a clinical mindset that we would go ahead and replace the HME, they pointed out very appropriately that they're very expensive. And if there was no problem with the HME, they wouldn't replace it.
I thought it was so neat to hear from both families and the outpatient team because it's just so different from what we think about in the ICU. And when we were writing the scenarios, we were thinking about how we wanted to teach to perfection, teach to the ideal, right? But then as soon as you leave the hospital doors, that's really not what people are focusing on anymore. They're focusing on real life and they're focusing on how to get through day to day and progress over perfection. And that was a really big lesson for me.
Yeah, the children at the playground really resonated too, like real life out there being a child, all the developmentally appropriate things.
Did you guys notice differences in how the tech savvy and the maybe less tech savvy participants engaged with and responded to the extended reality system?
Yes, very much so. Both within their ability to actually navigate and complete. We had one very tech savvy physician who was on the ground in AR, in VR, no problem at all, very interested. And then another participant who was like, I can barely turn my phone on. I hate this. This is not for my generation. I'm too old. And it just is a matter of interest and comfort, right?
And I think with that, because we didn't design the study to really look at that, but I could say anecdotally, just in my perception, the augmented reality, so the one where they have the phone and it's a digital space is represented in the physical space, they can walk around it. There were definitely some issues all the way around. That one, unfortunately, scored the lowest with our SUS scores, but it was really interesting because the scores were either very high or very low, unlike both the other modalities. So that's the only one where it was a very clear split, very high, very low. And the people who did really well appeared to be more tech savvy and they loved it. The people who scored it lower, they did not like it at all. Like there were definitely points of frustration. And there were some things that I think there's a little bit of a learning curve that just take time to get used to. And with orientation, when you think about zooming on your phone, you think of a pinch zoom. For AR, you actually have to move your phone because you're looking through the lens of the camera. So you bring your phone closer to whatever it is you're trying to look at. So there were some technical things that just had to be taught, but there was definitely, you would see people, even after having that in orientation, you would see people try and zoom in with the pinch zoom. We've gone back and forth about the best way to do it. Like if we should still pursue AR even, there were a lot of challenges, but there was a lot of excitement with it. So, and I think it's still a struggle that I don't know we have the answer for. Even with the virtual reality, I can say like our SUS scores were good. They were adequate and they're going to be better now that we've made improvements based off the feedback. But I think VR had the highest on the SUS scores, if I remember correctly. But on top of that, the users that Amanda was describing, the ones that even weren't as tech savvy, they really enjoyed the experience. They felt like they were there. That was a consistent theme that was really powerful.
Tell me a little bit more about the emotional or cognitive impact of families like doing this virtual training. Was there anything else you noticed along that vein?
In terms of the emotional impact, I think the high fidelity simulation that we do in the simulation room prior to discharge really prepares them for that. They initially are quite taken aback when they realize that they're practicing for skills that they're going to need to use on their child potentially. And that always seems very emotional. I actually didn't appreciate that as much with this. I don't know if it's because it felt a little bit more gamified, but it seemed like it was a little bit actually more psychologically safe to me than my experience with high fidelity simulation.
And they were able to focus on the task at hand.
I think to Amanda's point, the one caregiver did say that she wished that she had the opportunity to do this when she was going through. But if I recall during the interview, it was not necessarily as a replacement, just as an adjunct, because there is something, our facilitators are amazing when they're going through and doing that with the caregivers. And I think that really is powerful, getting that feedback, especially when that realization does happen that they realize that they might actually have to do it. It is great to have a facilitator right there. When we designed this module, one of the things we were considering was, is this going to be synchronous or asynchronous? And we landed on yes. The idea is that patient family members can practice this on their own, but our hope is that we'll be able to have a nurse educator who can go in and check to see how people are doing. And when, as people are, if they notice anybody that's having any issues, they can actually schedule a session and they can log in virtually with them. They could be in a VR headset while the family members are on their phone, and they can go through and help navigate if there's any concerns. And I think that is a huge piece. I don't know if I could say reasonably that it is a one-to-one to having a facilitator live in a physical simulation. I don't think we have nearly enough data to even consider that, but I think that we know having a facilitator there helping people through simulations is beneficial. And this is a modality where we can help provide at least some of those tools, even when we have the challenges of distance, which might be miles to states or even countries away.
That's an amazing support that you're describing, which had not even occurred to me as a possibility for the facilitator interaction with them to be able to follow them home and let them tap back in as they need for the refresher. That, as you mentioned earlier, it's so challenging logistically to get people all the way back to the hospital days, weeks, months after discharge if they want or need a refresh on the skills. That's beautiful.
To piggyback on, so one thing to note is that our hospital is in the city and parking is also very challenging and families come from far away. So to have this as an adjunct tool that they can use at home, even to supplement their training in the meantime, can potentially decrease the amount of time they need in hospital, decrease the length of stay, which is something that we're really hoping to prove in the future. Also, when we were initially developing this program, there were a lot of feelings and concerns about if our intent was to replace the in-person high-fidelity simulation with a trained simulation facilitator, and want to make very clear that that was never our goal and remains to not be our goal, because we think that these things really work well in tandem with each other, and we would never want to undermine how important the PCU's simulation program is. More so, we hope to partner with them to improve the outcomes for the patients and hopefully decrease the length of stay for the families.
Did you find that there were particular features that seemed to improve their confidence or retention, like or haptic feedback or repetition? Or
one piece of feedback that we got that I had never thought about is when the trach change occurs and they're at the park, you have to take the kiddo either out of the stroller, or in real life, you could maybe lay the stroller flat. But in this simulation, we have them take the child out of the stroller, place a blanket, and get down on the ground. And the thought of, oh my goodness, my child could be anywhere and I could have to do this, because in the hospital, it's very controlled, right? Everything we practice is in the crib. So we got a lot of feedback that was an aha moment for a lot of people. And when we were actually in the headsets and you really do have to get down on the ground, people really liked that.
Yeah, I think that the getting down on your hands and knees was really just a huge aha moment for the clinical team members that were going through, and the patient family member that went through said that they appreciated that you had to do that. Like, you actually had to move and go around. I would say the other thing in general that people felt was helpful with retention was just the movement. So compared to the screen-based, where they're clicking through, which presented its own challenges in how it was designed, but the VR, and even those that appreciated the AR, really appreciated the movement of actually having to go around to the back of the crib for the suction machine, having to go around and grab the trach bag and having to set everything up. But they appreciated like being able to move around in that 3D environment to be able to access all of those things.
Get that muscle memory under control. What an experience. So you shared a little bit about the future thinking, and I just keep thinking about the international abilities of being able to, teach remotely. And it's just fascinating work. For our simulationists who are out there and they would like to start an XR project, what advice would you give for them?
I think, first and foremost, just as if you were developing a physical simulation, focus on your goals and objectives. What's the goal of this module that you want to build? What are the objectives? And that will help you determine if XR is a reasonable approach, because it's a very powerful tool, but it doesn't solve all the answers. It is growing in capabilities, but there's still limitations, just as there are limitations to our physical simulations. I think that's always the starting point, just good pedagogical or andragogical theory of keeping on that goal, keeping on those objectives for whatever you're trying to build. And then for modality-wise, trying to think of what it is that you want them to accomplish if there's specific things that they need to do. So, for example, this one was challenging in the idea, like a trach change is a tactile skill. And I think it's important to point out we're not teaching that tactile sensation. We're not teaching the kinesthetic components. They still are moving around. They're going through the equipment. They're going through the process. There's in no way could this replace the practice trach changes that they do in the patient room with the care team, because those kinesthetic skills and those tactile feelings are crucial for it. This is the reason this was beneficial is it does reinforce the steps, and it helps you consider all of the entire process, which is crucial. If you were looking at building something that really was focused on those kinesthetic skills, this might not be the approach. So I'd say intubation. If you were to practice intubation, this wouldn't be the tool. It would be a static airway mannequin, because you need to be able to lift the mandible, displace the tongue. You have to manipulate your blade, and you have to get that feedback on the blade. So we can create a laryngoscope on a controller, and they can move it, but they wouldn't feel anything. They wouldn't have any resistance. So there are limitations. But if you wanted them to, we'll say in a clinical setting, if you wanted them to check a pulse, you can actually do that with the controllers and get a pulse that correlates to the patient's condition, which is really cool. So it just depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve and if this is the right modality. And I think that's probably the biggest question. Are you trying to do it because XR is cool and it's like the next thing and people want that? Or does it fit the theory? Does the educational theory support what you're trying to do? Does XR support that in your overall goal and objectives?
It's fantastic. Matching the right modality to the educational theory. Best practices. Amanda, what advice would you give?
So as someone who does not live full-time in the simulation space like Keith does, if you are someone who is clinical but passionate, I would say find yourself a partner. I have really enjoyed working with and learning from Keith, and he teaches me every single time we have a conversation, including today, something else I didn't know. But you can really kind of play off of that with each other. So sometimes I'll have to say to Keith, like, hey, do you realize you're not speaking a language I understand right now? And the two of us are able to both take different areas of our expertise, right? So my expertise is specifically in the tracheostomy and ventilator and ICU and to discharge worlds of the trach vent population. Keith's expertise is in the simulation. So together, we've made a really powerful partnership and also have an amazing team supporting us. But I think to find yourself a mentor in this work, if it's something that you're not comfortable doing, and those clinical and simulation partnerships can be so important sometimes. And I definitely learned that in this work.
I think that's a great point. There was definitely some things, like it's great working with somebody who is as passionate and excited about the project as you are. After some of our testing sessions, I remember just texting Amanda and then calling and just so excited about the interviews, and haven't had a chance to compile the data yet, but just so excited about what we were hearing and talking about our next steps and thinking it through. And it's great to have somebody who is passionate and has the same vision, but can also help push it in different ways.
You're both an amazing team, helping to support our pediatric community and the families that care for them and improving patient outcomes.
Thank you both for taking the time to talk to us. This has been fascinating, and I've learned more than a few things listening to you guys talk about your project. This is amazing.
All right. Thank you, guys. Any other little statements you'd like to say?
Just thank you for having us. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you for encouraging us to chat today. This has been really fun.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having us. And hopefully when this gets posted, you can put out our email and, welcome people to reach out if they have any questions.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the IPSS Podcast. A special thanks to our behind-the-scenes producer, the talented Danish Kumar, and to the Starship Foundation for providing the equipment that makes this podcast possible. Join us next time.